Herzlich willkommen zum UnleashPeople Podcast, dem Podcast für alle, die HR und Talent Acquisition strategisch denken. Wir, Ina und Christian, liefern euch gemeinsam mit Expertinnen und Experten regelmäßig frische Insights, die euch und euer Unternehmen voranbringen. Heute sprechen wir mit Andreea Lungulesco, Gründerin der Talent Crunch Community und Talent Acquisition Expertin, über genau die Themen, über die wir in HR nicht mehr sprechen. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to a new episode of the UnleashPeople podcast after our summer break. And we have a guest that I would say almost everybody knows in Germany, in Berlin for sure, when they're in the TA bubble. It's Andreea. And we decided on a very, let's call it, unusual topic today, because in the past, let's call it month, everything was about AI. And we don't want to speak about AI today. We speak about something completely different, and that is all the topics that we don't speak about anymore in HR. And so, Andreea, the stage is yours. What are those topics in your opinion? What don't we mention anymore?
Well, Christian, Ina, I'm really glad that we are finally doing this. We've been talking about it for a while. And I know now how much time we have. So I will mention some of them because I think we would not be able to name them all in the time we have for the podcast. I think if we look only at talent acquisition, yes, you are correct. And I share your opinion. We've been taken over by AI topics, and it's great, right? Progressive, innovative, yes, to all of that. But now we forgot to look what we put AI on top of. I feel we have not spoken in a long while about what candidate experience really looks like, feels like. We haven't spoken about the basic processes that some companies are still running on, haven't been updated since 2015, even maybe earlier. They're still running the same processes, maybe slapped the tool on top. We haven't talked about the way we assess our people, and that is both our talent acquisition people and the people that we interview. Are we considering how the job market is changing and how we should interlock talent, as in employees, with tooling? Well, not really. We haven't spoken about what employer branding means. We haven't spoken about what an EVP means, especially when you're thinking about the Pay Transparency Act. I'm going to stay away from that and from the EU AI Act, because that's a whole nother Pandora box. But these are just some things that we tend to forget about, or we pretend they don't exist, whereas they are all things that we actually slap AI on.
Yeah, that's a bunch of cool topics, and I'm also not talking about pay transparency, even though it's my topic. I really like it. But I think the first thing you said about like old processes and whatsoever, it's just so true, and I think it's the same trend that we had before AI with tools. It's like new fancy whatsoever tools, but then companies do not have their easiest processes in order. And I said that right before we started the recording, right? So how can I in TA think about fancy AI, whatever stuff, when I'm not able to do this simplest automation and send people like hey, I received your application, and no, sorry, this time it won't work out, right? And that's not AI. It's a click in the freaking tool, and it's the easiest process ever. And even if they do not get that, and I think that's the same with a lot of other processes where you should think about, okay, what's my company philosophy? What do I want to achieve? What's my process? And then think about all the rest, like how do I do it, with what tool and whatsoever.
So I now have a question that we need to take a decision. We can spend the remaining 26 minutes and listing things we don't speak about anymore, or we pick some topics and try to figure out what we actually can do against that. And I would actually prefer the later, and kind of move away from 30 minutes rant about everything into a, let's say, more solution-focused approach. So let's pick 2 or 3 topics. So what would be your favorite, Andreea? What should we now kind of focus on to begin with, and then see whether there is an easy solution or probably not?
I can be really mischievous now and pick EVP. But if I pick EVP, there is so much in it that is connected to all the other things. So I'm not going to pick EVP because that's a complex one. I think process is a love language by now. And then I would also like to look at the skills of the individuals we hire in talent acquisition roles. I had a very brief conversation earlier, which triggered this in me. And I think we should potentially look at that. Again, we don't speak about it anymore. It's kind of presumed, assumed, and we just go along like things will settle or will work out. And I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, and that's also a bubble piece, right? Because we are so kind of, how can I say, imprisoned in our bubble, and we don't have any, I have the impression, real connection to the basis of what we are doing, that we kind of run in circles and circles and circles and actually don't really deliver a proper solution. So I guess that's a very good approach. Ina, do you have one more topic we could try to solve today, or is that already enough?
Let's start with those and see where we end up. I can always throw in new topics.
Good. So process, because process is also something that is very, very dear to me. Why don't we speak about processes anymore? Why do we do that? Andreea, what's your opinion on that?
I think we speak about processes. We've just moved from, Ina mentioned it briefly already, right? We moved from an understanding of the basics to the fact that we use all the new appealing keywords that are floating around, and we inject them in our daily conversations, in our business speak, in our memos and what's or not, that sometimes people, I think, forget to actually look at what is right under their nose. And it's not applicable also to all sorts of companies. This needs to be very transparent and very clear, right? There are companies which are doing an amazing job on the front, and there are companies which are stuck in their old ways. One of the reasons I assume this is still happening, it's actually connected to the second part, and that is related to the talent that we bring in to manage and lead these processes. So I think we forgot that in order for us to have return on investment on the things that we do, we have to understand the basics of the things that we do really, really well, so that we can expand on them and further elaborate. And then when you have a flower pot, you start with the pot, you put the soil in, and then you put the flower, and then you have this beautiful, ultimately, flower pot, right? But you start with something. And I think we forget how important that recipient is to talent acquisition in particular, because that's what we're talking about, but it can be applied everywhere. I don't want to make this into a monologue, so I would maybe ask you, because you two are also very heavily involved with people, with companies, with customers. Have you noticed recently any organization who has taken a step back and assessed where they are leaking in their processes, and have taken proactive steps into stopping those leaks?
So, proactive? I would lie if I say 100% yes. There are some organizations who are willing to change because they suffer from the way they are doing things. So the pressure is super high in changing. But what I also see is that they are quite reluctant to really dissect everything and kind of really take a step back and see what the hell are we actually doing, and at which step in the process do we lose something? Do we do an extra step? Do we kind of get stuck? That piece is very, very rare. And I sometimes get asked to do something completely new, which doesn't make sense because every process that exists, well, there's a reason the process looks like it. It might be good, it might be overcomplicated, it might be bad, but not everything is wrong in that process. And they implemented things for a specific reason. And I guess we need to understand which parts of the process are vital to the company because it's their way of doing things, and which parts of the process have been kind of added on top because everybody wants to have their own way of doing things, and nobody is willing to streamline in the long run. And then you have a A2 sheet of paper with a process outline with all possible exceptions you can imagine. And usually the candidates get stuck somewhere in the middle. And there is no back, there is no forward. And then people kind of try to scream, say, we need something new. Or we need a tool that helps us. Both ways do not work properly.
Yeah. Sorry, Ina.
I think so. For me, it's not, well, I'm not working actively in talent acquisition, but I think what I see in companies currently quite often is that the main target is to have a fancy tool and to be fast. We need to be faster than the rest. We need to adapt to whatever, AI, fast, instead of exactly what you said, stepping back and think about, or even before, create a common understanding of the process. So I really had situations where someone wanted to set up a meeting very proactively and say, hey, this process seems to be broken. Let's sit together. Let's look at that process step by step. And I know it's nitty gritty, but we should make sure, because something in this process is broken or not really working well, that we all have a common understanding. And like a first reaction, it was a bit of a split group, but first reaction was, everyone knows. And then you looked into it and it's like, yes, everyone thought that they know, but then they all knew different things. And there was not even a common understanding. So, and I think this is that step back. Currently what happens is people want to be fast, ahead of the competition, and development is so fast. We need to be faster, instead of sit down, get the basis right, have a baseline, and then continue, right? And the baseline starts with a common understanding. Based on that, you can define, this is what we want to achieve, and here's the process. And then you look for all the rest around it. And I think for that, you need to take a little bit of time. And that's, I think, is something that I see in a lot of companies. People are not willing to sit down and take 2-3 hours to discuss the basics.
I wrote down, when you were talking, I wrote down operational excellence, because I was privileged enough to work with companies and go in companies and train their talent teams. And this was one of the trainings done. And for me, I am extremely guilty of this not understanding. For me, it's a bit like, how do you not know that? But then I forget, right? Maybe 15 years ago, obviously, I didn't know that either. But operational excellence, one of the most basic things as part of it is documentation. The amount of organizations that you see who have no documentation and do not make it's an effort, right, to document everything. It's not the easiest thing. You need someone to keep that updated and so on and so forth. But operational excellence is one of the things that I believe sits at the bottom of it, or very, very close to the bottom layer of building your processes efficiently and optimally. And I thought when you two were talking, I realized I have 2 examples in mind, which for me, one is a do that and one is don't do that. Two companies that I've worked with, one I haven't worked with yet, but it's in discussions. I don't think it's going to go forward. But one company said, we want to do an entire redesign of our interviewing, right? We want to do structured interviewing. Where do we start? We had 2 days together, very, very deep, in order to understand what structured interviewing looks like. What do they have to get prepared for, how to think, right, about this. And the second part was literally designing the interviewing process, not from scratch, but from what they had, looking at what worked for them, looking at what was visibly missing, looking at things that maybe they haven't considered, but might be missing in the future, and so on and so forth. So 2 full days with a lot of homework for the team. They took it away, and then we have follow-up conversations to see where we are with implementation. The second, do not do, was started as a proposal to an organization. Also, same thing. We want structured interviewing, etc. And we also want to train our hiring managers. Love, absolutely love. And then what they went on doing, they started building the training for hiring managers. And I was like, that's counterintuitive a little bit. So you're training your hiring managers, which are 100 plus of them, right, on the processes that you want to change and why. So as usual, right, you have the saying in German, I have the saying in my language, which is Romanian, the fish stinks from the head. Right? When you have a lack of understanding of how to prioritize these simple, they're quite simple, right? It's not rocket science. We are not reinventing talent acquisition or anything for that matter. It's simply looking at where do we stand and where do we start. So get that on a piece of paper, do your due diligence, look at the people involved, find your low-hanging fruit. I hate that, but it's true. Find what will bring you the most return on investment, the fastest as well for you and the company, and then start somewhere. So how to do your processes is not this is not the podcast for that, I assume. But some awareness that before you get trapped into yet another sales call, yet another demo, yet another, we invented the only sourcing tool you will ever need. Yeah, sorry. Let's have a look a bit at how you do things today and whether or not that God Almighty tool will be your saving grace.
Yeah. I just had to think about a LinkedIn post. I'm not sure if you saw it, but today with one of the next, you have to have that sourcing, no, not a recruiting tool that assesses motivation of the candidates for, I don't know, more than 50,000 euros per year, like horribly expensive. So I saw that today on LinkedIn, and I actually scrolled a little bit on LinkedIn while I was in a call. Sorry, and I had to laugh so hard.
You know what I realized? There was one other thing I wanted to bring into, because a process has a downstream, right? It has upstream and downstream. And I posted something on LinkedIn today about what happened to OpenAI and Apple, right? Apple sued OpenAI for kind of like trying to get OpenAI tried to get someone from Apple to kind of sell knowledge, and that part of the process which was left unattended to was the offboarding. So we are talking about process in talent in general. It's not just your incoming, right? Attraction, application. It's your entire process stream that can have quite a disastrous effect on your organization or department if left unchecked. And it's not just one piece that is fixed and we are washing our hands. It is the entire stream. How do they affect each other, and what is the ultimate end result?
Yes. And another aspect that I stumble upon quite often is that specifically in the tech space, startup, scale-up tech space, as soon as you say process, people run away screaming because they believe that process means some rigid whatever that you cannot change, and that is actually slowing down. And I don't know how often I already have said that. Well, kind of developed process speeds things up considerably. It makes you much more flexible. It helps you take faster decisions, and it saves you a lot of money in the mid to long run. Yes, you need to invest. That's what you said, Ina. You need to sit down. You need to analyze. You need to do a proper process mining if you want to go that deep, and then redraw it in the way you need it and in the way you think it should look like. And then you give it a try, and if it works, it's fine. If it doesn't work, you iterate and you kind of do some tweaks, and then after, let's say, 2 to 3 iterations, usually you have the basic process in place that actually works for your organization. And then your point comes in, and as soon as you have that, you can create the training for hiring managers and interviewers. Because the first thing I train my interviewers and hiring managers is the process. This is your process. That's your responsibility. I need scorecards within 7 hours after the interview, no later, because otherwise I will reject your candidates, yada, 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 yada. And then you can actually move forward to training interviewing. And then you can incorporate onboarding, offboarding, the complete life cycle of an employee. Don't be mad, but it's not rocket science. It is not rocket science. You have the same things coming back every single year. As soon as you hired somebody, right? And that's what we also said, performance management, salary, whatever. And there are no big changes apart from the height of the salary, hopefully. But that's it. So why are we so reluctant to take a look at that? And why are we so keen on just putting some tool on top of it, hoping that it works, which apparently doesn't, because the saying is old and it won't change even today, shit in, shit out. And if you kind of feed shit in, you will get a shitty result. And that has been the same for the past 26 years, at least.
Mm-hmm. You know what? I want to segue into the second topic. And how do you know that 26 on the dot, like to today, the 16th of July?
Yes, there was a memo. There was an email.
Okay, fair. I got you. Okay, gotcha. You know what I thought, and I think it does segue into the second part we thought we might be able to touch upon. We have become so obsessed with niching things out to some extent, and in some professions, that we became slightly oblivious to the importance of someone being multifaceted and multi-potentialized. And I think we could learn a hell of a lot from manufacturing, right? I mean, Germany is, or was, hopefully still is, quite great at that. But in manufacturing, if we look at the very basic manufacturing process that you have in a factory, it is there for a reason. It is repeatability, it is diagnosis, it is understanding where along the process things went well, not well. It is data collection, yada, yada, yada. And then you have the elements of, I don't know, Kaizen, Lean Six Sigma, whatever, all from the manufacturing side of things. And then imagine that the talent partners today, or those who want to further develop into becoming talent partners, they have a very narrow focus on talent acquisition and talent acquisition alone. Whereas, in my opinion, expanding our knowledge base to other industries and professions is should be paramount. There is a lot of talk about, there is a lot of talk about a lot of things, but there is a lot of talk about treating HR or talent acquisition as a product. there is a lot of talk about design, systems thinking, about lean design, about thinking like a designer, thinking like a product manager, etc. Right? So there are reasons for this, provided that they haven't necessarily taken much of a main stage. But there are reasons for that we can learn from, and we should, in my opinion, learn from adjacent roles and industries around us to understand what can we borrow, what can we adapt to our work, to our role, to our industry, what works for them, what doesn't work for them, and how would this work in our situation. And I think that we are very, very guilty. When I look at some of the individuals in the talent acquisition roles today, especially the more junior ones, we are very guilty of niching them down. They also have a responsibility themselves to want to expand, right? But as an organization, you niche them down and you think they will become an expert in such and such, but that expertise, too narrow, limits their adaptability, limits their future expansion potential. So I think we are trapping ourselves in many ways.
You're touching a point that Ina and I spoke about with Hang more than a year ago, because at that episode, we actually asked, why the hell are we in HR kind of adapting concepts blindly and try to kind of slap them over HR without thinking how they work, without understanding how they work. A player concept, for instance. I will not go down that road today, but we have a very strong tendency to take a look at things, even if we don't fully understand them, and try to kind of push them into our space and then just use it. Product managers, for instance. A good product manager understands the complete life cycle of the product. He knows all the interfaces to everything, to everybody, because if that person doesn't know that, the product is going to be shit. And then we should do the same. And you're completely right. We need to be very open-minded when it comes to our work. I'm still a huge fan of specializing on things, for instance, tech recruiting and whatever recruiting. But you need to understand how the company functions, how everything works. You need to understand how performance management works, because you need to tell the candidates. You need to be able to kind of show the development path. You need to know everything. And then you can actually create the benefit and the business impact you spoke about earlier, because you know exactly whom we are looking for and what that person needs to bring. But that requires unsiloed thinking and an unsiloed organization, because otherwise we are just kind of running blindly in one direction.
And you may have seen the news about Zalando. This is one of the saddest things, honestly. Zalando will always be in my heart. I think I had a most amazing career with them. And ever since I left, I look back and I shed a tear every now and then. Imaginary tear, right? But they've just announced that they are moving, they're opening in Bucharest, funny enough. I was at the company in 2016 where they were talking about Bucharest as a center, as a hub. It's 2026, they're finally doing it. And they will use it a bit of like a shared service center. Mm-hmm. And many companies have done that, especially the larger ones. For some, it makes sense, right? But also look at the acquisition. Adobe acquired SEMrush, Salesforce, Contentful. These big, gigantic organizations, they have this model of service center or shared service center. And what this ends up doing is building those exact silos, right? You might say we have a central silo, but in those silos, we have little pockets and they are attached to ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. Are they really attached? I don't know, right? Are they? I also understand that if you have them all separate, it's hard to maintain the same quality, the same process. So there are reasons on both sides. But if the workforce that you put in that shared service center is not well enough trained, well enough developed, if you cut corners bringing people in just so that you have workforce power, the risks are really quite big. And I'm not a magnet, right? I wouldn't know to tell you how to run your multi-billion-dollar business. But in simpler terms, right, you just run a very basic machine without an understanding of the implications for like further down the line. They know their box. And I agree with you, right? Some specialization is absolutely crucial. Yes, the T, right? Let's do keyword ping pong, a T-shaped individual. But then when that specialization gets in the way of innovation, growth, understanding, again, upstream, downstream impact of your work and your processes, then it becomes, it does become a business problem, a profit problem, right? Or it can become. And there we are again, the bad guys taking money, cost center, HR department.
Delivering no real business impact, just costing money,
Yes.
and complaining all the time that I want a seat on the table. We have been through that conversation several times.
I bet. Yeah. So it's like a never-ending circle, and I think that's why when we chatted about this, Christian, this kind of sparked in our conversation, because we talk about the same things over and over and over again, and then we gloss over and we pretend like everything's fine. We throw some new buzzwords to the problem. It feels like it's a conspiracy sometimes, like this quarter we will focus on skills-based hiring. Okay, let's go crazy on skills-based hiring. Then, no, HR as a product. The next 4 months, bam, bam, bam. Then automation, It feels like it's a loop. It really feels like a loop that is never ending, and it sits. If I would draw it in my mind, here is the basic, everything, and here is the loop, and this basic is screaming, "Look at me, fix me."
And then I usually like to ask the question when it comes to like this new process, this new trend, this new whatsoever, like what is HR accountable for? Like what can they decide really? And in most companies, you don't get it. It's like, look into the role of, is it HR business partner, people partner, whatsoever. And then when you look into even the job descriptions, it's generic blah blah in most cases. And then when you really look into, I don't care if it's agile, if it's this, first I want to know what is that person actually, or this function actually responsible and accountable for. And especially in HR, it's often a bunch of topics. If you just ask, we don't want to talk AI, but if you just ask AI what's in the HR job, you get a list like from payroll to executive coaching to everything in the middle. And then next step, what are they actually responsible for and what can they decide? And I think in most companies, you won't get an answer. And then you wonder why all tools and fancy processes and fancy new methods are not working, because the baseline is not there. What are they responsible for?
Yeah.
Like in recruitment or in talent acquisition, first question is there I don't know, can the talent acquisition person have a veto right? Yes or no?
Mm-hmm. You know what? Yes. I think, and I think Christian knows this about me, I can be quite opinionated about things. And this is one of the things I'm opinionated about, because I remember my own self, and I know you don't know me, Ina, I'm a very small person. So I make up in person. Right? I make up in personality for what I don't have in height, kind of like that. And I remember my own experience I started in consulting, and then I moved in-house with Zalando, right? And I remember when I saw things that didn't work, I kind of took it upon myself, like a little warrior that I am, to change. So I agree with what you say. And then I would add on top of that it is, yes, we have the leadership, but that leadership can also be influenced, right? And I think that is in our each and every employee's responsibility to try to influence things bottom up. If you care. If you don't and you're coasting and you like your little job and you want to stay in your little job forever and a day till you go into rente, pension, so be it. But I think it is partially, partially, our own responsibility to observe what's going on, because we are working with this pot, with this flower thing, right? We work with it, we see it's drying and so on and so forth. So it should be our responsibility. So maybe that would be in our responsibility in the description. It's your responsibility to be responsible for getting yourself up to speed, or getting yourself being like driving things proactively.
I agree with that, but still, but I think it's still important to discuss that, because what you have from time to time is like, hey, HR is responsible, and then you come up with a topic and it's like, yeah. And then suddenly HR is not responsible anymore. And you have one exception after the next exception after the next exception. And this leads to total chaos. If like the process, what is your actual job you're responsible for, is not clear at all. I don't know how it is, if it's maybe it's different in talent acquisition, but in the overall HR department, so often, apart from, yes, they kind of do the recruitment process and payroll, it's not clear what the actual responsibility is. And what they can decide and what not. And then you have to ask for every little shitty thing, which slows you down like crazy. And sometimes it's a yes, and sometimes it's a no. Right? So, yeah.
So what can we do about that, right? Because that's the big question. And we are actually already at the very end of this conversation. Unfortunately, I knew we could go on for forever, but my question now to the two of you as a final statement would be, what actually really is in our hands to make sure that we are also accountable and responsible for the things that we are actually doing. What can we do? I will start with Ina, and Andreea, you have the last sentence, and then hopefully everybody knows a bit more.
What can we actually do? Start with the basics. Define what are the basic processes, what do we want to achieve, and then sit down, take time, talk them through, write them down. Like Andreea said, like let's look a little bit into what we can, like how does manufacturing and so on work. Write a stupid SOP, standard operating procedure, in how the basic processes work, who's responsible, and step by step, and have a process on how to optimize. Because that's the other thing about processes. You can think about a great process, you have to figure out, does it work, doesn't it work, and optimize it. So either it works seamlessly, then hey, hands off, never change a running system, but measure, is it still working in half a year or a year? And if a process needs, like, for example, a ton of exceptions every other week, it's wrong. Redesign it until it's working smooth and easily, and it's not perceived as a burden.
I think we had two topics, right? So one is the basics in terms of talent, which is the processes, which we love to talk about and do nothing about. And the second part was the kind of individuals that we bring up in this profession today. Don't get me canceled for this, but I think we should act our age, and we have the responsibility to the little plant pot and the plant itself, and we should take that responsibility seriously if we want to be accountable for things, and even if it's not handed to us, we can ask for it. So I would say the individuals today who put on a good show, that they are interested in the betterment of this profession, should pull their big girl pants on. And if they want the responsibility, they can go for the responsibility. They can make a case for it. They can investigate what is around them and what is working and what is not working from their point of view, and start approaching this proactively. So, yeah, maybe I stop there.
Thank you very much. So, kind of bringing those two things together in the end, it's from what I understand, twofold. It's the individual who needs to take their responsibility seriously and actually step up. And on the other hand, the organization also needs to make sure that people can step up. So it's some kind, I don't know, it's a hen-egg problem apparently. So in the end, we should do both in parallel and see what's coming out of that. Andreea, Ina, thank you very much. It was a pleasure speaking with you. So much insights, I would say. A bit of a rant was included as well. So the only thing remaining for me to say is thank you very much again for your time, and have a good rest of the day. Bye.
You too.
Das war's für heute. Vielen Dank, dass ihr bis zum Ende dabei geblieben seid, und bis zum nächsten Mal.